now on the YouTube. I'd like to thank if it's not just me on the screen, as you can see, I'd like to thank my friend Nadim Ramik for joining me. Hi, Nadim.
Hey, Gary, it's an honor, brother. It's an honor to be here with you.
So great to have you join me and answer some questions. Nadim, how do you and I know each other?
Oh, we've met each other a long time ago through the legal community here in St. Louis and through some business development marketing groups that we've been part of. And we've hit it off. We've been good friends ever since, man.
Yeah, we're kindred spirits. Nadim, tell me about your legal practice. I know. Tell us a little bit about your legal practice before we get into answering some questions.
Well, when it comes to my practice, it's mostly personal injuries, car accidents. That's the bread and butter, and we are mostly focused on the Bosnian American community. So it's that's kind of where I'm at, being Bosnian American myself, and considering the numbers of the Bosnian Americans here in the St. Louis area, it's been good to help them.
Excellent. Well, listen, what I try to do some talking about ourselves, but I try to dive right into questions. I know we kind of, you and I are busy people, and we kind of zone in right on the meat and potatoes of stuff in life, is my experience with you. So let me ask you a legal question. From an immigration law point of view, I know that you're an immigrant. Could you share with us some views on immigration law and maybe the way that immigrants are being characterized in the press or by the government in the last year or so that is different than maybe it has been in the past?
Well, first of all, I would like to say that I've lived in the United States now for 21 years, I think. Came here in 99, and what I have to still say, the United States is still the greatest country in the world. So I am originally from Bosnia, and I've also lived for almost 7 years in Germany as a refugee, and came to the United States in 99. Having said that, most Bosnian Americans really had it easy when it came to coming to the United States. There was a program that was set up by Bill Clinton for refugees that couldn't go back to their homes in Bosnia after the war, and so as soon as we got here, we were made permanent residents, and within 4 or 5 years we were able to become citizens, which most Bosnian Americans have made use of. What we always knew was the United States was an immigrant country. I mean, this is kind of how this country was founded, by immigrants, right? And so the recent rhetoric that's coming, from the very top, from the White House, about vilifying immigrants and kind of making it sound like immigration is bad, and then just trying to twist it and say, well, we're not saying all immigrants are bad, we're just saying that the illegal criminal aspect of that is bad. But we've got to keep in mind that most immigrants, and statistically speaking, most immigrants are very well educated. They are opening up businesses at a greater percentage than native-born folks. So they're really contributing to this country amazingly well and making this country richer through that process. So that rhetoric coming from the White House, it's just unfounded. It's not something that we like to see, but at the end of the day, that's kind of what's coming from the top.
There's so much news coming out of this, out of the executive branch on immigration and everything else. It's like drinking from a fire hose. People don't remember stuff that happened a relatively short time ago. What about the Muslim ban? Remember that? I mean, it's only a couple of years. And it was literally the Muslim ban. That's a legal question. What did you think of the Muslim ban, Nadim?
Well, first of all, I've got to say, I'm a Muslim when it comes to religion. I mean, I'm not a practicing Muslim, or am I, hardcore into it, but I am a Muslim. And so when that first came out, I kind of felt, affected. And at the end of the day, you've seen it come in bits and pieces. Yeah, it's just Muslims from these countries. Well, it's just these people from these countries. But then the question becomes, because it's a step-by-step process, when are they going to come for me? You know what I'm saying? When are they going to make a sweeping change that says, yeah, Nadim is a citizen, but he's a Muslim, came at this time? Well, maybe we need to keep them out as well. So that's why it was important to speak out at that time and say, no, you can't do that. You can't alienate people by, by their religion, and say that they're a greater danger to the society than everybody in general. So that was kind of scary.
I hate to be silly. I mean, I don't even think we've talked religion before. When I asked that question, I did not. It wasn't even my brain that you were Muslim. I was just thinking that as a legal change that we saw come through. Um, uh, so that's you raise an interesting question. Is your citizenship that you have uh, is 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 the government or anybody else collaterally stopped from attacking your citizenship? Can anybody do a collateral attack on you being in our country?
No, I don't. I don't think on me. I mean, I don't think anything is going to happen in that regard. But it's just one of those thoughts that you keep in the back of your mind because they are systematically chipping away at those rights. So who knows what tomorrow's executive order will be when it comes to that.
Because a lot of immigration law is executive orders. And we talk in this program a little bit about the different origins of different laws. You have state law, you have county ordinance, so you'll have federal law, and in the federal law, you'll have statutes or those things. You'll also have executive orders to do things. People forget sometimes. So I'm like me in terms of my time in the U.S. It's going to be like your kids, Nadim, because my people were Irish and German immigrants. They came over in about 100 years ago, this part of the last century, and they were treated bad. I mean, the Irish were thought of as given all the bad jobs and just a bunch of drunks and stupid people. The Germans, my grandfather had bricks thrown through his bakery and other things of anti-German sentiment. So it's kind of weird that many immigrants when they come in have this racism against them before they kind of talk like everybody else and look white or Caucasian or whatever else you're supposed to look like, and then they kind of pass. I don't know. I'm just kind of, that's not really a question. I'm just kind of talking.
And that kind of makes perfect sense. And I've talked about these things with Anna Crossland, who's the president of the International Institute, and she's been doing that job for the past, I think, 150 years. But every single immigrant wave that came to the United States has faced some backlash. And I think that's why it's so important that nowadays that we've got a voice, that we speak up and say that ain't right. You know what I'm saying? That's why we need to step up to the plate and what's not right is not right, and fight those injustices.
All right. Well said, Nadim. I don't have anything to add to that. Nadim, I'm going to just jump into some questions, and we'll get through as many as we can. You take this one first. What's different about law in European countries versus the U.S.? What would you change? What makes it better, worse?
Okay, so I can mostly speak when it comes to Bosnia and Germany. And as a matter of fact, when I was still in law school, oh my God, back in like 04, 05, 06, whenever that was, I did a little study abroad program in Germany, and I studied their immigration laws. And as a matter of fact, Germany only recently recognized that they're also a country of immigrants, because after World War II, in particular, Turkish folks came to Germany to work, and they just stayed there. Unfortunately, a lot of them did not have an option to become citizens. And you will have a third generation person from Turkey that's never been back to Turkey, and they're still considered a Turkish citizen. They're not given all the rights that they could have had in Germany, and that only recently changed. So I'm not an expert on immigration law when it comes to that stuff, but I think the United States has got some great immigration laws, if they're followed correctly, make this country much better and more advanced than the rest of the world.
Great answer. My only addition is there's so many different layers of the law. So I've studied a lot of international law myself. So international law, you don't have a Bill of Rights like we do. You don't have a Constitution like we do. Sometimes you don't have a Seventh Amendment or a Sixth Amendment, which are the rights to a jury of our peers in criminal or civil matters. So a lot of times to redress grievances, like the kind of the law that you and I practice, our daily deal, Nadim, is you don't have a right to sue people for that stuff, or you don't have that. There's a lot of administrative law, a lot of administrative procedure. You have appointed judges and systemic legal systems. It's only when you get up to upper courts that you're able to maybe appeal and stuff. You don't have the similar property rights. Although American law is based on mainly much of an English law, unless you're in Louisiana, then it's based on a French law as our foundation. There really is just a different standards and abilities. Sometimes the governments also have more power. Look at. They dealing with the corona epidemic we have going on now. Sometimes European countries have more power to make people wear masks, quarantine people, that kind of stuff, than the power that's exercised. So the differences between the laws are just varied. And to answer the question about what would I change, it's interesting. It depends on the time. So you want everybody to have freedom, and we don't have to wear helmets when we're riding motorcycles, which is the law that takes effect like 3 days ago in Missouri, et cetera. But when you have something like an epidemic like this and controlling it, you're like, maybe the government should have a little bit more control on the periphery and stuff. So I don't know. Thoughts on any of those topics, those points I made, Nadim?
Yeah, having lived in Europe, and I think that the United States thrives on the fact that it's so individualistic and those individual freedoms. And so when somebody comes around and tells you should wear a mask to protect the others, you're like, well, no, that is affecting my individual freedom. In Europe, people are more receptive to that because they're kind of thinking of the greater good instead of just about themselves. Here, and I think it mostly starts at the White House, like it's all me, me, me. Otherwise, I don't care about anybody else,
Let's move on to some other questions. Good points. This is just changing topics. These are going to come from all over the place, Nadim. What are your thoughts on police reform? Seems odd that military personnel go through training each year, but police don't. Police have initial training. What about annual training? And then there's this, now the remedy is defunding versus increased funding. What are your thoughts on the legal side of this, either liability or training as a police? From a lawyer's point of view, what do you think about these police issues that are raising themselves, that are pointed out in these questions, and that are raising themselves in our public consciousness?
I think that discussion usually takes the wrong turn when it gets to the extreme. So people talking about defunding the police, hey, nobody is saying I hate the police and that's why we're doing it. People are saying, let's not defund the police itself, but let's take some of the money that we're putting towards automated weapons and put it in maybe like educating our police officers a little bit more, maybe increase their salaries as well a little bit, because in my personal opinion, police officers are, definitely not paid well for the jobs that they're doing. And so every time somebody brings that discussion up, it's kind of like if you say defund the police, you're like anti-police, which is not true. I love police. Some of my family members are in the police force. A lot of my friends are police officers. And I think 99.9999999% of the police officers are doing a wonderful job. Unfortunately, the ones that are not, that are the bad apples in the batch, that's going to come to the forefront, and then everybody's painting the entire police force as being bad. So from a legal standpoint, when it comes to better educating your police officer, giving them, better support to do their job, I think in the long term, it's going to benefit the cities, the states, because once a police officer that's a bad apple makes a mistake like that, well, guess what? There's civil recourse. The cities are going to get sued for that, negligence or willful acts. And so at the end of the day, I think in the long term, it should be good to maybe look at the resources going to the police and maybe make better decisions where they should be going. And that's what I understand when they talk about defunding the police, not just taking all the money away from the police departments, because that'll be stupid.
Fantastic points. I echo them all. Well, one of the things in the question, I think police do have continuing education. I don't think it's one and done when they got out of the academy. So I think they do have, for me, they'll do have reminders and retraining on this stuff. And the more the merrier, the more they do. I agree on more salaries, better pay, better training, that kind of stuff. And when I heard you talking about 99.999% of officers being great, dedicated people. I mean, it's hard to be an officer, to go in that line of work. It's, to be doing that every day. You're just navigating a lot of things in society you're on the front lines. The other thing, though, is you're right, is that, it's just like with lawyers, there's a few bad apples, a few bad lawyers color it for everybody. You and I are personal injury lawyers, and personal injury lawyers, it's a joke. There's all these jokes on late night TV and stuff about ambulance chasers and sharks and no respect and doing dishonest things. And I know the way you and I conduct our practices and our lives are to be above reproach, always do the right thing, follow all ethics rules, go beyond that, avoid any appearance of impropriety, et cetera, et cetera. But then we have some lawyers that don't do that, and then the entire profession has a cloud cast on them. So some analogies there, would you say?
Oh, that's definitely right. That's definitely right. And kind of along those lines, when it comes to police officers, and as I said, I've got a lot of friends that are police officers and doing a wonderful job. In my personal opinion, what I think is one of the biggest issues in those situations, and this is boiling down to the Second Amendment. Everybody's armed to the teeth. So a police officer going into a situation has got to assume that the person on the other end may be armed and dangerous. And so coming from Europe, where, there is no Second Amendment, there is no right to bear arms as freely as here in the United States, I think that kind of gets to the root of the problem, because if police officers are going into a situation knowing that, hey, this person doesn't have an automatic weapon pointed at me, I may not be as trigger happy as I probably would have been. So, that's just my personal opinion on that topic as well.
I got some more great questions. Here's the next one. Why is Nadim's background so much more professional than Gary's?
That's because I'm just amazing.
All right. Next question. 10% of something like 10% of St. Louis residents primarily speak a language other than English. How much do language barriers impact those individuals when it comes to the legal system? At the scene of the accident, communications, etc. Do you mind if I answer this one first?
Oh, definitely. Go ahead.
Because when I turn it to you, I want to talk to you a little bit about what it's like representing a Bosnian American population of folks that I know you have so many connections in the community. So it is hard for someone without English. I had a case one time where the police report had all these details, like she said she slid or she hydroplaned my client, or all these big English words, and they blamed the guy who rear-ended her. The police report blamed my client. Well, as it turns out, my client did speak a word of English, and there's no way that not only would she say something to a cop, but she wouldn't use words like hydroplaned or all these big words. So you knew it was a police officer taking care of someone who he identified more than my client who did not speak good English. I have a current case I represent the family of a Afghanistan translator who you want to talk about quick access to citizenship. He got flown, he served translating for our troops in Afghanistan, got flown here, immediately got a green card, because we have a fast track for people who help in our armed forces as translators in some of these hot spots to give them immediate citizenship so they can escape with their families. The police report in that case, This is a kid riding a bicycle, and they totally made it the kid's fault that he had the right of way at an intersection. So those are two minor examples, but language is a barrier on some things, as well as citizenship. Because if you're an illegal alien, if you're an illegal immigrant, I don't want to use the wrong word, but if you're not documented here and you get injured, you go try to make a legal claim. The first thing you can't do it because you're worried about ICE coming and getting you. You could be really, really injured, and I've had clients, mostly Mexican, who have to go back to Mexico for medical care and do that other stuff because I say, listen, I'll help you as much as I can. And sometimes I send them to friends who are better with, que se habla español mucho mejor, más mejor que yo, which is my bad Spanish. So anyway, let me turn it over to you, though, as the person who does speak other languages and deals with this as well. Same question.
Yeah, obviously I've seen that happen as well. The police officer arrives at the scene and they will not even talk to my client. They won't even get their side of the story. They'll just try to speak to them, and then they'll realize they either speak broken English or they don't speak any English at all. And they will just put the version of the driver that rear-ended them at the end of the day and kind of try to blame our clients. I've also seen it a lot, when it comes to, I've sat at a few depositions where the person translating wasn't really that good. And one of the funny thing is, that I remember from one of them, the question was, have you ever had, neck pain before this accident? And obviously, when you're in your 50s, you've had neck pain before. And my client answered that question, yeah, I've had neck pain before. And the translation came, yeah, I had a broken neck. And I'm like, no, that's not what it. So I had to shut a few depositions down because of bad translation as well. So yeah, there are definitely issues when it comes to English being the second language in legal claims, and they pop up in the beginning, in the middle, at the end. So.
Can an undocumented person still make a personal injury claim?
Is that a question for me?
That's you.
Yes, they can, but I think you mentioned it previously, and I've had those situations before. They come in, they've been badly injured in a car accident. I tell them, yeah, we can make a claim, we can pursue it and all that stuff, but they're worried. I tell them we need to file a lawsuit, and they're like, well, is ICE going to come for me? So then they kind of not do it.
I'm going to jump back to a question that echoes something you talked about a little bit ago. This is a question from Maya. What factors inform an immigrant's decision regarding citizenship in the U.S.? For example, my mom has been living in the U.S. for more than 30 years as a legal alien. Why might an immigrant choose not to pursue citizenship in the U.S.? Your thoughts, Nadim?
That is a good question. So, for example, in Germany, if you wanted to become a German citizen, you first had to go into your consulate, into your embassy, and say, I don't want to be your citizen anymore. So if I want to become a German citizen in Germany, I would have to first go to the Bosnian embassy and say, I don't want to be a Bosnian citizen anymore, get a piece of paper, and with that, you go in and try to become a German citizen. Here in the United States, it's really not the case. At the end of the day, you are becoming a citizen, and you are kind of saying, hey, listen, this is my country, and I love this country. This is going to be country number one. But you still can have a Bosnian passport. You can still do stuff, within Bosnia. You can vote and all that stuff. So I guess it's kind of a dual citizenship. A lot of people don't want to go through the process in particular now, and I guess our buddy Jim Hacking could talk about that all day, every day. They're really trying to make the process as difficult as possible to become a U.S. citizen, and they're going to try to find anything and everything to prevent you from becoming a U.S. citizen. And then the other thing is cost factors. I think the citizenship application is supposed to double in the next couple of months. So a lot of folks say, nah, I've got most of my rights here as a permanent legal resident, and I'm just not going to do it. I'm not going to spend the money. The issues and I tell this to all my clients, become a U.S. citizen as soon as you can, because at the end of the day, if you're driving down the road in your car and God forbid you hit somebody and injure them, and you may have had a beer or two or something along those lines, and you're not a citizen, guess what? The chances are high that you're going to get deported. So that's another thing to consider, that God forbid something happens where you screw up, you may get deported for minor things as well.
So can a U.S. if you become a U.S. citizen, can you keep your citizenship in another country and be a dual citizen?
They never request us to give up our citizenship in Bosnia. So from what I'm understanding, yes, we are still Bosnian citizens. We can still get Bosnian passports. We can still vote in Bosnian elections. But I think it depends from country to country when it comes to deals that they've struck with each other. So just depends.
What do you think about? I got some more immigration questions.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think of the border wall?
Well, you know what? I think it was just a political stunt that's going to cost the U.S. payers a lot of money. And at the end of the day, I don't think it's going to do anything in, kind of preventing illegal aliens to enter the country from Mexico. So at the end of the day, I think it was a bad idea from the get-go. I don't think that's the right way to do it, but what do I know about that, right?
What do you think? Well, I mean, yeah. Did you see that but here's what you do know about, and I know about, is fraud cases. I've had a number of big cases, class action cases and stuff, where organizations make wholesale fraudulent anti-consumer schemes to defraud people. And we have the Missouri Merchandising Practices Act. There's federal and state anti-corruption laws, fraud. What do you what do you think about that not-for-profit that took all this build the wall not-for-profit money and Steve Bannon went and bought, and that other guy went and bought boats and cars and all that crap? Isn't that crazy?
Well, I always like to think, show me who you're with and I'll show you who you are. And our president used to surround himself with a lot of folks that have gone astray when it comes to
a lot of people in prison and indictments. But how would you? Let me ask you this: would you take this? I'll just make if anybody gave money to that border wall right now, call my firm up, call Nadim up if you're Bosnian or otherwise. Call us up. We'll take that case. I'd take a Missouri Merchandising Practices class action case against those people in a minute. Although it sounds to me like the Southern District in New York federal prosecutor is doing a good job in pushing that, even though he got the president tried to throw him out of his job. I'm having questions on our feed here about the Supreme Court and when it's going to make a decision on the Missouri Department of Corrections lawsuit. There was a hand-down date yesterday. The Supreme Court did not render a decision in the case, so the case is still pending. I argued it on April 22nd. It's been a little over 4 months, so we're still waiting. And that, Nadim, sometimes I say that old Petty song, "The waiting is the hardest part," from that song. Sometimes in law we do that, right? Waiting for a decision.
Yeah. There? Yeah, and you've done the hard work. You've done amazing work for those correction officers. My cousin is amongst them as well. And so hopefully the Missouri Supreme Court will do the right thing as well.
Now, this gets into a legal question and also touches on some of our fellow lawyers that spoke in the RNC conference last week. Can someone use lethal force or the threat of lethal force to protect property that is their own or that is not their own? Nadim?
That's one of those that I'm no expert, but making a judgment based on the videos that I've seen, that was just not called for. You know what I'm saying? That was just looking for it. And it's a little, and then as you said, there's always these couple bad apples within the legal professions that are gonna, now people think that all lawyers are as litigious as those two, in their private lives, always trying to bully their way into things. And let me tell you, viewers, we're not. We're actually very, very nice people. We're usually forced into litigation by opposing sides. But at the end of the day, were they within their rights to, brandish those weapons at peaceful protesters? There's just going to be a lot of back and forth, yes or no. I think they were not. I think there was no threat to their property nor their lives, and therefore they were not allowed to do that.
Do you know what their qualifications were to speak in the RNC convention last week?
What's that?
They pointed guns at black people.
Mm.
Let me move. That's it. That's it. Then they get to speak. Let me ask you this though: what about these? And then the other part of this question is: what about its property that is not their own? We have this 17-year-old kid driving hundreds of miles to protect property with an AR-15 at a gas station in Kenosha, Wisconsin. What are your legal thoughts on that?
Before I get into the legal thoughts, my personal thoughts on it are property is never more valuable than a person's life. No matter what property it is, it's never more valuable than a person's life. At the end of the day, I don't think the castle doctrine, even if they have it in Wisconsin, will allow you to protect somebody else's castle with lethal force. And for viewers that don't know what the castle doctrine means, it's kind of like if you're in your home and then an intruder gets in and you've got a gun, you have the right to shoot them, basically. Even if you could run away through the back door and safely escape, you still have the right to shoot somebody. So am I for that castle doctrine? No, I'm not. I'm totally against it. Again, if you've got an option to flee, no property is more valuable than a person's life. And this is the debate that we've got going on. So bottom line to your question, protecting somebody else's property with lethal force, no go.
So I'm going through some more questions here. Nadim, how much have you dealt with sovereign immunity or official immunity? And what are your thoughts about the immunity that is afforded by either sovereign immunity or official immunity? I've done a lot of litigation in that area. What are your thoughts on that? And the specific question is, do you think legislation should be introduced to modify it, or do you believe that it works as is?
You know more about that than I do. I've not done a whole lot of work when it comes to that. But
what about official immunity then for your police officer friends and relatives?
That's kind of what I said. It kind of boils down to the actual act. I think it's very, very fact specific. Like what acts were committed, and is it within their line of duty? Did they go entirely outside of the concept of line of duty and went out of their way to commit, something? So that's what I'm saying. It's kind of, even if they're my, brother, if they do something wrong, wrong is wrong. So there is no question about that aspect of it. But I think it's very fact specific on those issues.
Yeah, my thought on this is, so immunity is, so the origin or genesis of immunity comes, it's not just, it comes from our Constitution and the 11th Amendment and the 14th Amendment, and whether states are sovereign of the federal government, it goes through the whole Constitution, the Federalist Papers, and there's always that tension there. So there's a tension between how much a government can do, how much they should be liable to things. Should they be held accountable or be responsible? Yeah, but on the other hand, if that is overreaching, you don't want that too. And government officials have to be able to act with some level of immunity so that they can do their job. A police officer on the street cannot worry about being sued every time they go do something. Otherwise, they can't do their job. On the other hand, as you said a minute ago, bad is bad. They shouldn't do bad things. But there is a tension in this immunity. I think legislation is often done to change immunity. So, for instance, in Missouri, you can sue the government for a dangerous condition of property, for a automobile wreck, or if they have insurance for something, but you can't sue them for anything else. That's the balance. Does that leave some people without a remedy? Yeah, but it leaves a lot of people with a remedy. So it's not an unfair balance in my view. Interestingly, there's no immunity for breach of contract. The state can't enter into a contract and then breach it and say, oh, I know I signed there. I know I took all the benefits of that bargain and I'm not going to pay you. They can't do that. Differently, over in Illinois, you don't have a right to a jury trial for any claim against the state of Illinois, for any sovereign. Instead, they have a special court, an administrative court, kind of akin to some of the administrative courts in Europe or other European governments that we alluded to a little bit ago, where you don't have a right to trial by jury and you file an administrative claim that gets heard by a hearing officer, then it goes up to a commission and there's an appeal process there. So their sovereign immunity is changed by statute, and it's an administrative claim. Kind of like in workers' compensation in Missouri, you can't go to trial. You got to go to work comp and go to the division and go to those administrative law judges. But at the same time, you don't have to prove negligence on the part of your employer. You get automatic. So there's always a balance in these things. Each state waives its sovereign immunity the way it does. In federal government, and I know I don't want to be speaking at you, but I've done a lot of this work. You can tell it's all at the top of my brain. But in federal government, you have the Federal Tort Claims Act. So under certain circumstances, if you're a person, you can sue the federal government under the Federal Tort Claims Act. You can't if you're a member of the armed forces. But if you're a different person, for instance, if someone works for the federal government, rear ends you and injures you, you got a Federal Tort Claims Act case. And there's also federal work comp. So there's a hodgepodge of these lawyers. My instinct is that, and my gut is that it's balanced pretty well, differently, but it's balanced pretty well. So let me move on now. I could talk about immunity all day. So on our website, I did a CLE. Have you ever come to one? You've come to my CLEs.
Oh yeah, I love your CLEs, man. They're always so informative.
So I did a speech one of my ones last year called Immunity, Immunity, Immunity. It's on my website, on the lawyer to lawyer section of our website, where I go through a ton of law on immunity. It really depends on I think you already said it, Nadeem. It depends on the facts too. Let me ask you this. This is another police officer question. I don't know why we're getting them, but we're getting them. What do you think about the residency requirement in the city of St. Louis for police officers, and that being taken kind of undone? What do you think about that?
I think that's a good thing. At the end of the day, if somebody wants to be a police officer in the city of St. Louis, I don't really think that him living in the city of St. Louis should have anything to do with whether or not he can get that job. I think there's a lot of qualified applicants in the surrounding areas that would be wonderful police officers in the city of St. Louis. So changing that, in my personal opinion, is a good thing.
All right. Now let me go to another question. Here, this one's up here. Have you seen? I know you came here at a young age. From what I've read, and again, it's been a while. From what I've read about what happened in the former Yugoslavia leading up to the tragedies there, and the war, and the genocide, and that. Do you see any parallels? And I'm not saying our country's going to go there, but in terms of the dictatorship and the type of conduct or the actions being taken, did you see any parallels in what happened in your former country leading up to the explosion in it, and what we have in the U.S. now?
Yeah, to a certain extent, there are some parallels. So what we've got to keep in mind, in former Yugoslavia, there were a lot of tensions boiling under the surface. And most of those were, religious as well as, national rhetoric issues that bubbled to the surface, a few years after Josip Broz Tito died. And the new political brass in each of those now countries, at that time states, so Croatia, Serbia, Bosnia, came to the fore, and they start stoking fears in people that, hey, listen, this guy from Croatia is going to kill you in your sleep, and this guy from Bosnia who's a Muslim, he's going to rape your women, so you've got to watch out for them. Or this person from Serbia is that, and they should be, killed. And once those fears were, stoked by the politicians, people started believing them. And what you could see is that it led to to genocide, the worst genocide in Europe after World War II on Bosnian Muslims. And most of that was committed by neighbors. So folks that have lived their entire lives next to each other overnight, for whatever reason, decided to start slashing each other's throats, and the receiving end of that were mostly, Bosnian Muslims that paid a heavy price, and displaced a lot of people. A lot of people were killed. And so what you're seeing here, kind of in comparison, is the racial tensions and maybe some class tensions, where it's kind of like, hey, listen, you've got uh, um, African Americans coming from the inner cities to take over the suburbs, and they're going to kill your wives. That's kind of what you're seeing on the news coming from the top, and that is a little concerning because some folks actually believe that stuff. And when you see a lot of those that's another aspect of when people start talking about these issues, Black Lives Matter and protests and all that stuff. As soon as they're mentioned, they're associated with looting and burning stuff down. But what we've got to again keep in mind that 99.99999% of those protesters are just exercising their right that's given to them under under the Constitution of the United States to protest something that they don't agree with. But you'll have those bad apples that are going to go out there and they're going to look for trouble. They're going to start burning stuff down. They're going to start shooting people. And that's kind of what you've got on these two opposite spectrums. Unfortunately, instead of our leaders coming out and saying, hey, listen, calm it down, everything is fine, you've got politicians stoking those fears and saying, hey, listen, if you vote for this guy, you're going to have communism in 2 years. Or if you vote for this guy, Nazis are going to rule the United States tomorrow. So, and that's the scary part, because it divides people and it just creates more problems than solving them.
Let me follow up with another question I see here. Thank you for your insight. What do you think the best source or way is it to address the continued protests and/or riots? The question is to quell the riots, or local residents, police, or National Guard. Why do you feel that way? Let me could you mind if I go first on this one?
Sure.
So, when you were talking, some people would say, what an absurd question. Why would you compare what happened in your former country to what's going on? It's too far gone. But then my response, and it's not that I'm drawing direct analogies or anything, I wanted your insight. But the other thing, though, is that it has been surprising to me how some of the democratic structures and the strength of the American democracy has been so easily undermined in the last few years. Honestly, these institutions that you think are sacrosanct, and America's been here for 240 years, it's unassailable, but in some ways it's surprising how quickly it can unravel. I mean, we just had 8 years of the first African American president, a scandal-free, honorable, kind, nice man, leader, and then right after that we have these race issues where the person holding the same office, living in the same house, is saying that there are good people on both sides in that stuff. So now to answer the question, I don't think from a legal point of view the federal government has the right to send in federal troops on American soil to quell riots. It's maybe been done 3 or 4 times in history. It's a bad thing. I don't think you can do that. I don't think federal troops and the Army is meant to fight foreign wars, not local wars. Now, and if there are local issues, if there are the 0.001%, to echo what you said a minute ago, Nadim, of people who commit crimes during protests, those people should be dealt with like any other criminal and arrested. In America, no one is above the law and no one is below the law. And that doesn't matter whether you're a protester, a policeman, or the president of the United States. The law equals all of us, and it should. That's why justice is blind. So I don't think that there should, I think the way to quell the riots is to address the underlying problem. I mean, when people protested the Vietnam War, and when people protest stuff, fighting and beating down the protesters doesn't address it. That's what we complain about in banana republics or in the former Yugoslavia or these other countries. You got to address the underlying injustice that is the cause of this. These aren't meritless protests. So those are my thoughts.
And that makes perfect sense. Again, what the problem that I'm seeing here is those 0.0001 bad apples on each side. You will compare, like, hey, listen, all those protesters are bad because I know you've protested, Gary, with your wife and your kids. Are you that horrible criminal? No, you are a peaceful protester exercising your right lawfully, and you should have that right. And you should, that the people in power should listen to those mass movements instead of kind of just waving them off like, we've got no issues. Obviously we do. Otherwise, this stuff would not be happening, right? And so I sending troops to quell that, you know where that leads. And the other point is, all those folks that like the status quo are saying, well, if you don't like this country, well, why don't you leave, go somewhere else? Well, at the end of the day, this country was founded on people. If they're, not liking something, they're going to stand up for it and they're going to fight for it. You know what I'm saying? So otherwise, we'd still be under the British rule to this day. So I think everybody that disagrees with something should exercise their right, be protesting, and in particular, and I want to tell everybody and kind of get them off their chairs, go out there and vote. That's the way to make a change. That's the way to, have your voice heard, and that's the most important right that we have in this great country of ours, in this democracy.
All right. So there's another. This is a little bit of a segue to another question I have from Adam. Nadeem mentioned bullying. I know you hate bullies and actively support anti-bullying efforts. Are there societal entities you see as acting like bullies? How can citizens best stand up against them legally, given the disparities in power involved? That was one question. That's the difference between the police and the protesters are who has the badge and the authority of government. But
that's a question for me.
Yeah, you want to go first? You want me to go first?
Yeah. So how can citizens best stand up to them legally? We already have been standing up to them legally, because at the end of the day, if a police officer, if a landlord, if a creditor, starts bullying illegally citizens, guess what's going to happen? There is going to be lawsuits. There's going to be class action lawsuits against these creditors. There's going to be, changes in the law through those lawsuits. And so that's how we are holding them accountable and telling the folks that come after them, hey, listen, if you continue acting like these guys, guess what's going to happen? You're going to get hit with something. And therefore, that's kind of how we can legally address those bullying issues by those entities.
And then the thing that I would echo or add to that, is a great answer, is that, there's the idea in the law of due process, and that we have ways in legal ways for people to stand up to bullies or stand up to the police. I mean, landlords, creditors. You have a right, if you get sued by a landlord or a creditor, you have the right to have a lawyer and defend yourself. There's consumer protection laws that help you against creditors. There's landlord-tenant laws that protect you from overreaching of landlords. Sometimes people don't know their rights, but there's different organizations. Legal Services of Eastern Missouri for people who can't afford lawyers. There's different things that lawyers like Nadeem and I do to help people out or teach people or give people information. People can go to small claims court to address their own legal issues with stuff. The police have this qualified immunity law that some people say is too one-sided on the part of the police, and there's efforts and ideas to change that that I've seen written about recently. But if people have Section 1983, Section 1981 claims, civil rights claims, that kind of stuff, if people's civil rights are violated. So now justice can be slow. It's not an immediate thing. We do have protections to try to balance that so that people can't go overboard. So there you go. I have a rezoning question. Now, neither of you are zoning lawyers, Nadeem, but one of the things about lawyers is we're good. We can BS well too. No, but no, it's just joking. Seriously, we learn all these aspects of laws, even though we don't actively practice them. We do touch on them. Davey asked, I watched the McCloskeys bit on the RNC last week, and they mentioned that forced rezoning would bring crime and lawlessness to the suburbs. Can you explain what they were on about? I'm not familiar with all that and what zoning even is. Nadeem, you want to go first on that one, or would you like me to?
You go ahead and try this one.
All right. So first of all, the McCloskeys are not zoning lawyers, and I don't think they have the qualifications to get on the RNC and say that anybody is going to change zoning laws and try to move immigrants or darker skinned people into wider areas. That's what their message was and their scare tactic is. So basically, so some of the, all of the zoning cases about whether or not you can keep minorities in or out of neighborhoods came from St. Louis. A lot of these cases came from these old laws. St. Louis is it's a super segregated city, relatively wise. I don't want to bash St. Louis. It is, and our history is one of struggles with integration. So what they're talking about is permitting. So if you have a neighborhood that is zoned for single family residences, then they're trying to say that could be rezoned to let an apartment place or a townhouse that get moved in, and these are recognized as code words for letting minorities move in. And so anyway, so that's what the rezoning is. So there's areas that are zoned for commercial. On this street, you can have businesses. On this street, you can't because it's neighborhoods. On this street, it's more appropriate like I'm in downtown St. Louis right now. There's a lot of apartments. This is appropriate for apartments. It's not appropriate for houses. I live out at 270 and 40 where there's not a lot of apartments, where it's more single family houses, but there are places where there are apartments. And it's a way of zoning. It's a way to control expansion. It's great ideas behind it because you want to plan the use, you want to plan development, because if you didn't have these rules, just like we talked about legal rules and other stuff, if you didn't have rules, then development could be slipshod. It could be all over the place. I could have my nice residence and my 2 acres or whatever I got of land, and someone could put up a huge skyscraper right next to me. So you do want these zoning laws, but you don't want them to be overdone and used for discriminatory or redlining purposes. So I think that's what they were talking about when they were getting into that. So there you go.
Yeah, and I think what we also got to keep in mind when it comes to the zoning laws is they're very localized. So, example, the city of Crestwood has got a say into what they will allow in the city of Crestwood, right? So that's up to the folks that live in the city of Crestwood, because if they want to vote, Gary Berger in, who is going to be for getting some more apartment complexes or townhouses into Crestwood, well, they have that vote because Gary will be outspoken about what he wants to do with the city of Crestwood. So at the end of the day, the power still lies within those communities, whether or not they're going to allow something like that to happen. So it's not like, the federal government is going to come in and say, oh yeah, city of Crestwood, we need you to build, 1,000 low-income family units in the center of Crestwood, and therefore, we're making you do it. Now it's got to be, it's localized, and you have a word what's going to happen in your city, and I think that's great.
Can you talk just a little bit more? That's a really great point, Nadeem. And the difference, the federal government doesn't have the power to do that. And there are different laws. Local laws like zoning is left to local decisions. So it's not like the federal government's going to come in and do anything like that. Can you talk a little bit more about the difference in the laws and where they come from and where that power is?
Well, I think what you're getting at is the separation of what the federal powers are versus what the local and state powers are. And at the end of the day, our Constitution lays that out nicely. And this is going to add to your point that you mentioned previously, that the current administration is really testing the fabric of our Constitution and trying to push the limits of the executive power. And I still think, and it is the oldest constitution in the world and still the greatest system in the world. Why? Because we've all seen it, but for those separation of powers, but for the balancing act between the Supreme Court, the Congress and the president, our president by now would be the Tsar. And we've seen he's not managed to get there just yet. And I think one of the biggest wake-up calls was, the Supreme Court decisions that went against him, where he was so surprised about, like, hey, I just, put these people on the bench. How can they say that I'm not right in doing these things? Well, that's where the separation of power comes in. And I don't think he's read the Constitution. I don't think he knows that once he appoints the Supreme Court justice, he can't just, say you're fired. But that Supreme Court justice has got some leeway to make decisions that are actually, based in law and fact. So.
Great answers. Great answers. We're coming up towards the end here. Let me ask another question of us. I try to keep this at an hour. Just kind of like your classes in college and stuff. People after an hour, people are kind of done. Already maybe been done. I don't know. Here's a question from Adam. Thanks for those great answers. Do you feel like everyone gets the same due process you mentioned? I can't help but notice prominent cases where certain high-profile individuals, usually rich, white, or both, appear to be treated with deference by law enforcement and the courts, while others, socioeconomically differently, poor, non-white, or both, are not. So that's a question. You start this one, Nadim.
Unfortunately, that's the reality. And we all know that a lot of people don't have access to the courts because of the fact that most lawyers in the nonprofit sectors are overworked. They're unable to give the due diligence to a case that needs that due diligence. And, a criminally accused that gets a public defender to defend him, that same public defender may be handling another 400 or 500 cases and may be able to give an hour of his time to your case, whereby if you've got the money and the resources to hire the best funded criminal defense law firm, in that area, they're going to spend as much time. They're going to, they're going to turn every stone around to find something that's going to benefit your case. So, I don't think that most folks get the due process that they deserve in our court system. But at the end of the day, the system is not perfect, and more could be done. More funding to those legal services of Eastern Missouri, public defenders, and so on. They should get more funding from our government so that we ensure that everybody that gets charged with a crime in particular should get the same defense afforded than anybody else. So.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. Rich people do, or other people do get better benefits. They can afford more powerful lawyers. They're more connected to the community. They can throw their weight around. Look what people do with money in terms of influencing politics. Look what Rhett Sinquefield has done in Missouri with money in the last 10 years. Look what other people on the progressive side have done by trying to fund things. So they can do that, and they also seem to get different results. I mean, Roger Stone got his sentence commuted out of jail. That only happens if you're those connected, those type of people. That's what's happening. And the good news, though, however, is that we do have this amazing country. In America, though, this happens less than in other places. and we have this great Constitution that protects us. Now, but it's warped. It has warts too. That's the same Constitution that said that African Americans were only 3/5 of people and didn't count. And it's the same. So it has problems, and these all have problems. But this due process guaranteed in the Constitution is wholly absent in many countries. And even if there are these imperfections, we do have the right to due process. And there are, and I put up, and this is access to justice. And there's organizations that try to provide to assist and help with access to justice. So in addition to the legal framework, we also have organizations. So the Legal Services of Eastern Missouri, I happen to be a board member, but that is funded by the federal government in large part. And every year now some presidents have tried to cut the funding in recent years. However, so we know that. We acknowledge that because we have a capitalist system, there are losers in capitalism. Because we have an adversarial court system, there are losers in these court systems. Whether it's on the criminal side, we just put a link up to public defenders being overwhelmed. In the civil side, we have a crisis right now, a crisis of people being thrown out of their homes and by rent and possession cases that are about to hit hard, and all these folks have lost that work paycheck to paycheck, and so we need to protect those people. So if these issues are bothering people, and you watch this, there are things you can do to help. You can volunteer. You can do different things. I know Nadim does volunteer work in his own community. A part of our dues are filing fees. Every lawsuit that's filed, part of it goes to legal services or help pro bono, or people who have less of ability to afford lawyers. So I'm probably going on too long. There's a system. We have a system that takes care of it pretty well, and we also have people working within the system to try to ensure equal access to justice. Nadim, what's your parting thought? Tell me some parting thought. What's it like to? Is a last question for you. And by the way, thanks a lot for coming on, talking with me today. I value your insight. I value your friendship.
Thank you very much for having me, Gary. And I think we've covered a lot of things in this hour that we just had together. One parting thought that I want to leave with our viewers is that, and this is the problem, that once you've lived in this country your entire life, you don't know how good you have it. From my experience, at the end of the day, this is still the greatest country in the world, okay? And we need to keep it that way. And, there's much worse places out there. And so that's why we need to fight with every, ounce of our soul to make it, better and not worse than it is. So enjoy.
I do have one last question for you to take us out. And is what's unique about being legal counsel to members of the St. Louis area Bosnian American community? What a blessing! And there's a lot of articles on this about St. Louis. It's the middle of the darn United States. Ability to attract this community. It's kind of a unique set of facts that happen. But as you sit here today in 2019 or 2020, what is it about serving that community that is that you enjoy, that's fulfilling to you, or that's unique, or share some thoughts on that before we're done, would you?
It's just been an honor, and it's been a pleasure working with the Bosnian American community here in the St. Louis area. It's also easy for them to communicate with me, obviously, in Bosnian, and one of the benefits that they've got is that, we kind of came on the same boat. So I know their, journey. I know their, lives. I know what bothers them. I know their fears. I know their hopes. I know their desires. And so that's why it's been very good. And seeing the Bosnian American community progress the way it has over the last, we've only been here 25, 30 years the most, and the biggest wave came 99, 2000. And they've accomplished so much. This country has given us so much that we'll forever be grateful, and we'll forever, hold the United States, again, as the greatest place in the world to live.
Great. What a great way to close. Nadeem, I'll see you around, my friend. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gary. You have a good one.
Thank you. Bye-bye.